Harkov pressed the barrel of his pistol against the old man's temple and pulled the trigger without blinking. The body dropped. His soldiers didn't flinch. They had seen it before. 6 villages, 43 civilians. Same pistol, same cold eyes. He stepped over the man like he was stepping over a log and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Bring me the next one." That was the moment. That was the exact moment, 5 kilometers away, on a ridge no human being was supposed to survive on. A woman exhaled slowly, pressed her cheek against cold metal, and made a decision that would echo across that valley for years. If this is the kind of story that grips you, subscribe right now, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because it starts right here. The morning Harkov's convoy rolled into the valley, the goats scattered first. That was always how the locals knew. The animals felt it before the sound arrived. The low mechanical groan of armored vehicles grinding through mountain roads that were never built for weight like that. Old Morella, who had lived in the valley her entire 73 years, stepped out of her doorway and watched the dust rise from the northern pass. She crossed herself. Not because she was afraid, she had long since run out of fear, but because she had seen convoys like this one before, and she knew what they always left behind. General Dmitry Harkov sat in the lead vehicle with his boots propped on the seat across from him. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself like the ceiling was always too low for him. His officers had learned not to look directly at him when he was in a mood like this, and today he was very much in a mood. The mission briefing that morning had been simple. Extract intelligence from the valley, neutralize any resistance, move on by nightfall. 3 tasks. He had done this 100 times. What no one in that convoy knew, what no satellite feed, no intelligence report, no drone pass had detected, was that someone had been watching them for 6 days already. She was not in the valley. She was above it. Her name was Captain Elena Vasek, though she had not used that name in almost 4 years. In the field, she had no name. She had a position, a range card, a win log, and a problem she was calculating down to its last decimal point. She had been on that ridge since before the convoy entered the valley. She had been there when the sun rose the day before, and the day before that. She had a system, and the system required stillness, and she was very, very good at stillness. The rifle she was behind was not standard issue. It had been custom built over 18 months by an armorer in a facility whose name she was not allowed to say out loud. The round in the chamber had been selected from a batch of 47, each one measured, weighed, and documented by hand. The scope had been zeroed at sea level and then adjusted for this exact altitude. She had spent 3 nights accounting for the atmospheric pressure at this ridge before she was satisfied. She had not eaten since the previous morning. She did not move. Below her, Harkov's men dismounted at the edge of the village. She watched through the scope as they moved in their familiar pattern, 2 soldiers flanking, one pushing ahead, Harkov hanging back just enough to remind everyone that he was in charge, without being close enough to absorb the first round if something went wrong. It was the posture of a man who had survived this long by making other people stand in front of him. She logged the time. She adjusted her cheek weld. She waited. Inside the village square, things moved quickly. Harkov's second-in-command, a thick-necked lieutenant named Brezov, grabbed the first man he found and shoved him against the stone wall of the well. The man's name was Petri. He was 41 years old, a school teacher, and he had never held a weapon in his life. None of that mattered to Brezov. "Where are the others?" Brezov said. Petri stared at him. "I don't understand what you're asking me." Brezov hit him, not with a fist, with the butt of his rifle. Petri went down. Brezov stood over him and said it again, slower this time, as if that would help. From the ridge, Elena watched the altercation through the scope. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing slowed another fraction. She logged a position shift. She did not fire. Not yet. Firing now would be wrong. Wrong range, wrong target, wrong moment. She had not come this far to be wrong. The radio in her ear clicked twice. That was the signal she had agreed upon with command. It meant, confirm your position. She clicked back once. Confirmed. Then a voice she did not expect. Vasek. The voice was rough, controlled, the kind of voice that has given orders so many times it no longer needs to raise itself. We may have a problem. She kept her eye on the scope. Define problem, sir. The asset we were told would be on the ground, the one who was supposed to mark Kharkov's secondary position. Yes, he's not there. A pause that lasted exactly as long as she allowed herself. Since when? Since about 40 minutes ago. We think he was pulled before the convoy arrived, which means we have no confirmation on the secondary vehicle, which means I don't have a clean window, she said. Silence on the other end. I still have a primary window, she said. Give me 12 minutes. Bresov had pulled Petrie back to his feet. Kharkov had walked closer now, hands clasped behind his back, watching with the detached interest of a man watching someone else's problem. He said something to Bresov that she couldn't hear. Bresov laughed. 2 other soldiers laughed. Peter did not laugh. Old Morella appeared in a doorway at the edge of the square, and one of the soldiers moved toward her, and she retreated back inside. Elena's breathing had not changed in 3 minutes. Vasek, the voice on the radio said again, I need you to understand, if the secondary is still live and the primary goes down, there's a standing protocol. You know what that means. I know what that means. It means abort. Command position is abort if secondary is unconfirmed. She said nothing for a moment. Then, who made that call? Commander Walsh. Her eyes did not move from the scope. Walsh is stateside. He is. He has no idea what I'm looking at right now. He has the authority, Captain. She breathed in. She breathed out. Below her, Kharkov had moved to stand directly in front of Peter. He reached out and gripped the man's chin, lifting his face. Peter's eye was swelling shut. Kharkov studied him the way a man studies a map, looking for something useful. Tell me, Kharkov said quietly, in a tone that required no anger because it had moved past anger entirely. Tell me, and this stops. Don't tell me, and I will bring your family into this square, and we will have a very different kind of conversation. Petrie said, I don't know anything. Kharkov let go of his chin and stepped back. He nodded once to Bresov. Elena's finger moved to the trigger guard. Not on it, near it. Vasek, the radio said, confirm you are standing down. She said nothing. Vasek, confirm. The shot, when it finally came, did not come from Elena's rifle. It came from the far side of the square. It cracked against the stones and kicked up dust 2 feet from Kharkov's left boot. And for exactly 3 seconds, everyone in that square froze. Then absolute chaos. Elena pulled back from her scope. Her eyes moved. Someone else had fired. Someone she didn't know about. Someone who had just compromised everything. Kharkov hit the ground. His men scattered to cover positions. Bresov grabbed Peter by the collar and used him as a shield, dragging him behind the well. Kharkov was shouting orders. His security detail was already running perimeter positions, weapons up, scanning rooftops, scanning alleyways. Elena was already doing the math. If there was a second shooter in the village, Kharkov would be in a vehicle in under 4 minutes. He would move to his secondary position, wherever that was, a position she could not confirm, and then the window would be gone. Vasek, Walsh's voice cut through. What was that shot? Was that you? Did you fire without authorization? That was not me, she said, and her voice was flat and cold and certain. Then who the hell? I don't know, she said, but you need to listen to me very carefully right now. I have approximately 3 minutes before Kharkov reaches a vehicle. I have a confirmed position. I have wind, elevation, distance. I have everything. I need authorization. The secondary is not going to matter if you don't give me this authorization in the next 90 seconds. a long silence. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of people on the other end covering themselves, checking procedures, thinking about consequences. Below her, Kharkov was on his feet. He was moving. He was moving fast. 90 seconds is gone, Elena said. She had already returned to the scope. What came next happened in a space that she would later describe to a debriefer, not in seconds, but in fractions. The way Kharkov turned, the angle, the wind reading from the flag she had placed on a fence post 2 kilometers away during her first day on the ridge. A flag so small no one would notice it. A flag whose movement she had been reading for 3 days. The barometric pressure, the temperature at the barrel, the temperature at the target. The trajectory math she had done so many times in her head that it lived in her body now, the way a musician's scales live in their hands. She did not hear Walsh on the radio anymore. She did not hear the shooting in the village square. She did not hear the wind. She heard nothing. And then she fired. The round traveled 5,368 meters. At that distance, a bullet takes more than 6 seconds to arrive. 6 seconds in which the world continues to turn. 6 seconds in which Kharkov took 2 more steps toward his vehicle. 6 seconds in which Bressov released Petra, and Petra fell to his knees in the dirt. 6 seconds in which a crow lifted from a rooftop somewhere and arced across the gray sky. The echo came back across the valley a full beat after impact. The valley held the sound for a long moment, like a held breath, and then let it go. On the ridge, Elena did not move. She was watching the stillness that followed, watching the positions of the soldiers who had scrambled for cover and now did not know where the shot had come from, or why their general had gone down, or what they were supposed to do next. Bressov stood up from behind the well. He looked at Kharkov. He looked at the direction the echo had come from. He stood there in the open, which was a mistake, but fear makes people make mistakes like that, standing exposed in open ground when you should be running, because your brain has not caught up to what your eyes are telling it. The radio clicked. Walsh's voice came back, tight and controlled and very, very careful. Vasek, give me a status. She was still watching through the scope. Target is down. A pause. Confirmed down? Confirmed. Another pause, longer this time. You fired without authorization. She said nothing. You fired without authorization, he said again, and this time it was not a statement. It was the beginning of something else. Yes, she said. Do you understand what that means? I understand what it means, she said. I also understand what not firing would have meant. She began to break down her position, slowly, methodically, the way she did everything. She had practiced this in the dark, in the rain, on her back, one-handed. She could do it in under 4 minutes. She had done it in under 3 on a good day. On the radio, Walsh was talking to someone else now. She could hear the murmur of it, not the words, just the tone. The tone of a man doing damage control. The tone of a man who was going to have to explain a lot of things to a lot of people. She didn't care about that yet. She would care about it later, in a room with bad lighting and a glass of water, and people asking her the same questions in different orders. That was going to happen. She had known it would happen from the moment she made the decision. She had waited. She had decided that the weight on one side was heavier. What she cared about right now was getting off this ridge. As she moved, slow and low, along the path she had scouted 6 days ago, she let herself think about one thing only, the school teacher, the one Bressov had put against the wall and used as a shield. She had seen him go down to his knees when Bressov let him go. She had not seen him get up. She did not know if he was going to be okay. She hoped he was going to be okay. She did not let herself think about what it meant if he wasn't. She had 1.5 kilometers of ridge to cover before she reached the extraction point. She started moving. Behind her, in the valley below, she could hear the distant sounds of men trying to reorganize themselves after something they did not understand had happened to them. She could hear it the way you hear thunder that has already passed, present, real, but no longer the immediate thing. What she could not hear, what no one had told her yet, what no one on the radio knew yet either, was that the second shooter, the one who had fired that single shot in the square, the one who had scrambled her timeline and nearly cost her the window, that shooter was not an enemy operative. That shooter was someone who had been sent to find her, not Kharkov's people, not any faction aligned with Kharkov, someone else entirely, someone who had known where she was and how long she had been there and what she was waiting for, someone who had wanted to force her hand. She didn't know any of that yet. She knew the ridge. She knew the distance to extraction. She knew the wind had picked up from the northeast and that she needed to adjust her pace because the light was going to change in the next 40 minutes, and she did not want to be on exposed ground when it did. She moved. She breathed. She calculated. 11 years of training do not leave a person. They settle into the bones. They become the person. She was not thinking about what had just happened in the way that a person thinks about a thing they have done. She was thinking about what came next, the next step, the next position, the next calculation. But somewhere very deep, somewhere that the training did not fully reach, somewhere that was still just a person and not an operator, she was aware that something had shifted, that the sound of that shot, her shot, was still echoing somewhere, that it had landed in a place larger than a valley. She did not know yet that it would take 11 more days for the full story to surface. She did not know yet that when it surfaced, it would shake people whose names she knew very well. She did not know that Walsh's careful, controlled voice had already placed 3 calls in the 2 minutes since she confirmed the shot. 3 calls to 3 different people, 3 different conversations, each one carefully worded, and each one about the same thing: what to do about Elena Vasek. She crested the ridge. The sky was the color of old iron. The wind came in flat and cold from the east, and she leaned into it slightly as she moved, letting her body manage it the way her body managed everything now, automatically, without drama, without comment. She had 2 hours until extraction. She used the first 20 minutes to put distance between herself and the firing position. She used the next 30 to think. She thought about Peter. She thought about the man's face when Kharkov had lifted his chin. She thought about the particular quality of that silence. The silence of a person who has decided they are not going to be broken, even though they are afraid. She knew that silence. She had lived inside it for large portions of her life. She thought about the second shot, the unaccounted for shot. It circled her mind the way a problem circles before it surfaces. There was no good explanation for it that she had yet found. An accidental discharge? No, the placement was too deliberate. A warning shot from a local? No, the angle was wrong. A third-party operative? Possible. But who? Aligned with who? And why force her hand? Why not wait? Unless waiting was the thing they wanted to prevent. Unless the point was to force the shot before she was ready. Unless someone had known that an unforced shot, a perfectly timed shot, was more dangerous to them than a hasty one. She stopped walking, just for 3 seconds. She stood at the edge of a flat section of rock with the wind in her face, and she let the thought complete itself. If someone had wanted to disrupt her shot and failed, then they knew who she was, and they knew what she was doing, and they had a reason to want it stopped, which meant they had a reason to want Kharkov alive, which meant this was not finished, which meant she needed to get to Walsh, not to answer for the unauthorized shot, not for that. She needed to get to Walsh, and she needed to ask him one specific question, and she needed him to tell her the truth, and she was already calculating, in the quiet part of her mind where everything ran on its own, the probability that he would. She started walking again. The extraction point was 1.5 kilometers ahead. The wind was steady. The light was starting to change. She reached the extraction point with 11 minutes to spare. That was not normal. Normally she arrived with 3, maybe 4 minutes. The fact that she had 11 meant she had moved faster than she planned, which meant her body had been running on something other than calculation. She did not like that. She stood at the marked position behind a collapsed section of wall and pressed her back against the stone and forced herself to breathe slowly and count. She counted to 30. She did it twice. By the time she finished the second count, her hands had stopped doing the thing they sometimes did after a shot. That faint, almost invisible tremor that nobody else would ever notice, but that she felt like an earthquake. 11 years, and her hands still did that. She heard the vehicle before she saw it, a single engine running rough, the kind of rough that meant it had been driven hard over bad roads for a long time. The headlights came in low, one blink, then two. The signal. She stepped out from behind the wall. The man behind the wheel was not the man she expected. She expected Dolan. Dolan was her extraction contact. She had worked with Dolan 4 times. She knew his face, his habits, the way he kept his left hand on the wheel and his right hand always near the door handle because he had a thing about being able to get out fast. She knew Dolan. The man behind the wheel was not Dolan. She stopped walking. Her right hand moved without any instruction from her brain. It moved because 11 years of training had installed certain automatic responses that did not require permission. Her hand found the grip of the sidearm at her hip and rested there. Not drawing, not yet, just resting. The man raised both hands where she could see them. He said through the open window, "Captain Vasek, I know you don't know me. My name is Reeves. Marcus Reeves. Dolan couldn't make it. I need you to get in this vehicle right now because we have about 4 minutes before a patrol covers this road." She did not move. "Where is Dolan?" "He's been pulled. Command decision, made about 2 hours ago." "Pulled to where?" Reeves looked at her with something that was not quite impatience and not quite desperation, but something sitting right between them. "Captain, I understand you need to verify. I understand that completely, but I need you to get in this vehicle." "Pulled to where?" she said again, and her voice had not changed volume or tone, which was how he knew she was completely serious. He exhaled. "Dolan is in a building in the city right now being asked about you, about this operation, about whether he knew what you were going to do before you did it. That's where Dolan is." He paused. "And if that tells you anything, Captain, I hope it tells you that we need to move." It told her something. It told her several things at once, none of them good. She got in the vehicle. Reeves pulled out before her door was fully closed. She did not reach for a seatbelt. She kept her hand where it was, watching him, watching the road ahead, running the math on what he had just told her. "Who sent you?" she asked. "Someone who is not happy with the way this has gone," he said. "That covers a lot of people right now." "This specific person," Reeves said, "is not happy because they think you were set up. And they wanted you to know that before you walked into whatever debrief Walsh has planned for you." She looked at him for a long moment. "Set up how?" He kept his eyes on the road. "The second shot, in the village square, the one that wasn't you." She felt something tighten in her chest. "Go on." "That shooter had positioning data that should not have existed. Coordinates that placed you on that ridge, with a time window, a target, the whole picture. That information existed in exactly 3 places: Command's operation file, your handler's secure channel, and 1 other location." He paused for just long enough to let the weight of it arrive. "A location that is connected to Walsh." The vehicle hit a rough section of road and lurched. Neither of them acknowledged it. "You're saying Walsh burned my position," she said. "I'm saying someone did, and I'm saying the trail, right now, in its current state, leads toward Walsh." She looked out through the windshield. "Walsh has been running operations for 19 years. He has no reason." "He has a reason," Reeves said. "That's the part I'm supposed to tell you in person, because it couldn't go over any channel. Walsh has a reason, and the reason has a name." He glanced at her. "Harkov was not just a target, Captain. Harkov was a connection. A connection to something Walsh has been protecting for a long time. Something that, if Kharkov went down and was replaced by the wrong people, could surface in ways that would be very, very bad for Walsh personally. She sat with that for a moment. So Walsh didn't want Kharkov dead, she said. Walsh needed you to fire too early or too late or not at all. The second shot was designed to force a scenario where either you missed or you fired under conditions that gave Walsh reason to pull your authorization permanently. Either outcome worked for him. She thought about those 6 seconds. The round traveling 5,368 meters. The way she had shut out Walsh's voice in the radio and everything else in simply fired. She thought about how close it had been. How if she had been one fraction slower, one fraction less certain? "Who is your principal?" she asked Reeves. "Who sent you?" "Someone who served with you," he said. "Someone who has been watching Walsh for a while and saw this operation develop and didn't like what they were seeing. That's all I'm authorized to tell you right now." "That's not enough." "I know. Give me a name or stop the vehicle." He was quiet for almost 10 seconds. The road curved and he took it without slowing down, which told her he knew this road, which told her he had driven it before, which told her this had been planned. "Callahan," he said finally. She said nothing. She absorbed it. Callahan. She had not heard that name in 2 years. She had not expected to hear it like this, in a rough vehicle on a mountain road in the dark, delivered like a hand grenade with the pin already pulled. "Callahan is dead," she said. "Callahan is not dead. I was told." "You were told what Walsh wanted you told," Reeves said quietly. The vehicle went over a rise, and for a moment the valley was visible below them, dark and vast, with a single cluster of lights where the village was. She looked at it. She thought about Peter. She thought about old Morella in the doorway. She thought about the sound of that first unknown shot cracking through the square and the way it had detonated her timeline like a hammer through glass. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere safe. 12 hours, maybe less. Enough time to get you a clean channel to Callahan and let you decide what you want to do next." "What I want to do next," she said, "is understand who else knew about this operation. Who else was read in. Because if Walsh burned my position, he needed to burn it to someone. Someone who could put a shooter in that village with accurate coordinates." "Yes," Reeves said, "and that someone is connected to Kharkov." "Yes." "Which means," she said, and she was thinking out loud now, not for Reeves's benefit, but because the thought needed to finish itself, "that Kharkov knew I was coming. He knew. And he still came into that valley." Reeves said nothing, but she saw his hands tighten on the wheel. "He came in anyway," she said. "He came in with that knowledge, and he walked into that square, and he put a pistol barrel against an old man's skull in full view of the rooftops, and he was not afraid. He was not afraid because he thought he was protected. He thought the shot was never going to come." "That's what we believe, yes." She looked straight ahead. "Then someone needs to tell me why the shot came anyway. If Walsh burned my position to Kharkov's people, if they had a shooter ready to disrupt, if Kharkov believed he was walking in protected, then why is Kharkov dead?" Reeves turned the vehicle onto a narrower road. His jaw was set. "That," he said slowly, "is the question that is currently making a lot of very powerful people lose sleep." She almost laughed, not from humor, from something else, the particular dark quality of a situation that keeps getting wider the more you look at it. "The positioning data Walsh leaked," she said. "Was it accurate?" "It was accurate." "Then the shooter they sent should have had a clean, disruptive position. Should have been able to force my hand much earlier, before I had the window." "They should have, yes. But the shot came late. It came after I had already dialed everything in. It came at the worst possible time for disruption. The one moment where the disruption forced my hand forward instead of backward." Reeves was quiet. "So either the shooter they sent was incompetent," she said, Or the shooter they sent was not actually trying to disrupt. Or, Reeves said carefully, the shooter was sent by Walsh, but the shooter had a different objective than Walsh told them. She looked at him, meaning someone inside Walsh's own chain turned the disruption into a trigger. Meaning someone wanted you to fire, wanted Harkov dead, and used Walsh's own operation against him to make it happen. The vehicle stopped. They had reached a building at the end of a track so narrow she had not seen it as a road at all. Reeves cut the engine. In the sudden silence, she could hear her own breathing. How many people, she said, are running parallel agendas inside this one operation? Reeves got out of the vehicle. He looked at her over the roof and said, "That's what 12 hours is for." Inside the building, there was a table, 2 chairs, a battery lantern, and a satellite phone in a hard case. Reeves set the phone on the table. He did not open it. He sat down in one of the chairs and looked at her with the expression of a man who has delivered all the information he was given and is now waiting to see what happens next. She remained standing. She was still running the sequence. It was the only thing she knew how to do with something like this. Run it forward and backward until the variables resolved themselves into something that made sense. Walsh had leaked her position to Harkov's network. Someone inside that chain had then inverted the operation, using the disruption shot to push her forward rather than back. Harkov came in believing he was protected. He was not protected. He died. And now Walsh, who had tried to protect Harkov, was left explaining an unauthorized kill that he had privately tried to prevent while publicly failing to stop. "Walsh is going to come after me," she said. "Walsh is already coming after you," Reeves said. "The debrief he's building is not a debrief. It's a prosecution, unauthorized discharge, violation of standing orders, potential compromise of diplomatic negotiations." Diplomatic negotiations. She said it flat. "Harkov killed 43 civilians in 6 weeks. I know. There are no diplomatic negotiations worth." "I know, Captain." His voice was not dismissive. It was tired. "I know, but Walsh has spent 4 months building a framework around Harkov as a necessary actor for regional stability. On paper, which means on paper, what you did today didn't just violate an order, it potentially dismantled a 4-month diplomatic structure. That's what Walsh will say. That's what the file will say." She sat down in the second chair. For the first time since she had left the ridge, she put both hands flat on the table in front of her and looked at them. The tremor was completely gone now. Her hands were still. That was something. That was one thing that was still under her control. "Open the phone," she said. Reeves opened the case and slid it across the table. She looked at it. Callahan. 2 years. She had grieved this person. She had sat in a room by herself and processed the grief of it the way she processed everything. Methodically, compartmentally, until it was filed away and no longer something she needed to carry on the surface. And now here it was, back on the surface. A name on a satellite phone. A name that Walsh had erased from the record because, apparently, it served him to have that name erased. She picked up the phone. It rang once, only once. The voice that answered was exactly the same. That was the thing that hit her first, before anything else. The voice was exactly the same. 2 years and it was exactly the same. "Vasek," the voice said. "You're supposed to be dead," she said. A pause, then, "I heard the shot," Callahan said. "From here, on the feed. I heard it, and I knew it was you. I knew by the interval, the way you pace your breathing before. I've seen you shoot enough times that I know the interval." She said nothing for a moment. "Walsh told command you were KIA. There's a file." "Walsh needed me gone," Callahan said, "because I was the one who found the connection between him and Harkov. And when I found it, I made the mistake of writing it up and submitting it through proper channels." A brief silence. Turns out, proper channels, in this case, ran directly through Walsh. She put her free hand back flat on the table, pressed it down, steady. "How long have you been sitting on this?" Since they pulled me. 22 months. I've been working parallel to every operation Walsh has touched, trying to build a case clean enough that it doesn't get buried the way the first one did. And Kharkov. Kharkov was the linchpin, Callahan said. Walsh's arrangement with him went back 6 years. Kharkov provided regional intelligence that Walsh fed up the chain, and Walsh provided Kharkov with operational protection. Cover on 3 separate occasions where Kharkov should have been targeted. The 43 civilians, Walsh knew. He knew, and he blocked 2 separate proposed operations in the 12 months before today. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then opened them. The second shooter in the square today, was that yours? A pause that told her the answer before the answer came. Yes, Callahan said. You forced my hand. I gave you the window, Callahan said. I knew Walsh was going to pull your authorization. I knew the abort order was coming. I had one chance to push the timeline forward before that order locked in, and I took it. You could have told me. I couldn't reach you clean. Any channel I used, Walsh would have seen. I had to work with what I had. She sat with that, with the way it felt to be the instrument of someone else's plan. Even someone she trusted, even someone she had believed dead, even someone who might be completely right about everything they had just told her. She sat with it, and she did not like the way it felt. And she was honest enough with herself to understand that her not liking it did not make it wrong. What happens now? She said. It was not a question. Now, Callahan said, Walsh is going to accelerate. He cannot afford a clean debrief where you get to say what you know and what you observed and what you concluded on that ridge. He needs this contained. He needs you discredited or disappeared before you have a chance to talk to anyone outside his chain. How much time do I have? Hours, Callahan said. Not days, hours. She looked at Reeves across the table. He was watching her with that same steady, waiting expression. I need documentation, she said into the phone. Everything you've built in 22 months. I need it in a format that can go to someone outside Walsh's reach. Someone with the authority to act on it. I have it ready, Callahan said. I've had it ready for a while. I was waiting for the right moment. And Kharkov being dead, she said, that's the right moment. Kharkov being dead removes Walsh's last protection, Callahan said. Without Kharkov alive, Walsh cannot claim the diplomatic framework justifies his arrangement. Without Kharkov, the arrangement is just what it always was. A senior intelligence official providing cover to a man who killed 43 civilians in exchange for... In exchange for what? She said. What was Walsh getting? Silence on the line. The kind of silence that precedes something large. Money is the simple answer, Callahan said. But the real answer is bigger than money. Another pause. Walsh was getting names. Names of people inside various allied intelligence structures who had been compromised. Leverage. The kind of leverage that lets you survive in that world indefinitely because you always know more about the person threatening you than they know about you. She stood up. She could not sit still for this. She pushed back the chair and stood. He built himself a vault, she said. He built himself a vault, Callahan confirmed, using Kharkov as the locksmith. And now the locksmith is dead, and Walsh is standing in front of that vault, knowing that every name inside it is going to surface eventually. And when it does, he has nothing left, she said. He has nothing left, Callahan said, except you, and what happens to you in the next few hours. She looked at the wall. She looked at Reeves. She thought about Petrie on his knees in the dirt of that village square. She thought about 43 people who were not alive to be part of any of this. She thought about Walsh's careful, controlled voice on the radio, asking her to confirm she was standing down. Send me the documentation, she said. All of it. Already on its way, Callahan said. She lowered the phone. She looked at Reeves. He had not moved, but something in his expression had changed. He looked like a man who has been holding his breath and has just now allowed himself to stop. You knew all of this, she said to him, before you picked me up, You knew everything Callahan just told me. I knew most of it, he said. And you still came. He looked at her steadily. Someone had to. She set the satellite phone down on the table. She looked at the hard case. She looked at the battery lantern throwing its flat light across the room. She thought about the 11 minutes she'd had at the extraction point. She thought about how she had used the extra time to breathe and count and steady her hands. She thought about how none of that steadying mattered now, because what was coming next was not something her hands could solve. What was coming next was a different kind of shot entirely, and she had never been trained for this one. The documentation arrived 40 minutes later. Reeves had a tablet in the vehicle. He brought it inside and set it on the table next to the satellite phone without a word, and Elena looked at the files loading on the screen and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. 22 months of work, page after page after page, financial transfer records, operational logs with timestamps and authorization codes, intercepted communications, partially redacted but with enough visible to make the shape of the thing clear. And names. Callahan had not been exaggerating about the names. There were 41 of them, 41 individuals across 7 allied intelligence networks, each one documented as having been identified, cataloged, and handed to Walsh by Kharkov over the course of 6 years. 41 people who did not know their names existed in a file that Walsh kept like a private insurance policy. She read for 22 minutes without speaking. Reeves sat across from her and drank coffee from a thermos he had produced from somewhere and did not try to talk to her. She appreciated that. She needed the silence the way she needed air right now, not as a comfort, but as a working condition. When she finished, she set the tablet down and looked at the wall for a moment. Walsh didn't just protect Kharkov, she said. He built an architecture around him. Every time Kharkov should have been targeted, Walsh didn't just block the operation. He gave Kharkov advance warning. He gave him time to move, to restructure, to replace personnel who'd been identified. He was actively managing Kharkov's survival. Yes, Reeves said, which means every one of those 43 civilians. Walsh was not just aware, Walsh was complicit, because Kharkov's continued operation was Walsh's continued operation. Reeves said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. She picked up the satellite phone again. Callahan. The line connected in under 5 seconds. I'm here. The 41 names in the file, are any of them still active? 37 of them are, Callahan said, and Walsh has been leveraging them. Selectively, carefully. He doesn't pull the string often. That would make it obvious. But twice in the last 18 months, he used the leverage to redirect an investigation that was getting close to him. Once to close a file in London, once to have a source relocated who was asking the wrong questions in Brussels. She stood up and began moving. Not pacing, she did not pace. She moved with purpose around the perimeter of the room, the way she moved on a ridge when she needed to think, changing her physical position to shift her perspective. The file you built, where does it sit right now in terms of provability? 80%, Callahan said. The financial transfers are clean. The intercepts are clean. The operational logs are clean. What I don't have is a direct link between Walsh's communications and Kharkov's positioning data for today's operation. That's the 20%. Without it, Walsh's lawyers can argue everything else is circumstantial. But today's operation changes that. Today's operation changes that completely, Callahan said, and there was a quality in his voice now that was close to urgency, something tight beneath the controlled surface. Walsh burned your positioning data to Kharkov's network. That is a documented act. If we can trace the channel he used to transmit that data, and I have someone working on that right now, then we have the direct link. We have Walsh communicating operational intelligence to an enemy actor. That is not circumstantial. That is the 20%. How long for the trace? 6 hours, maybe 8. She looked at Reeves. He was watching her with the quiet attention of someone who has accepted that he is not the decision maker in this room, and is completely at peace with that. Walsh moves in hours, she said into the phone. You told me that yourself. 8 hours is not something I have. I know, Callahan said, which is why the 80% needs to go somewhere tonight, not after the trace. Tonight, because even 80% in the right hands, given to the right person, is enough to create enough noise that Walsh cannot move quietly. He needs quiet to come after you. If this is loud, he loses the initiative. Who is the right person? She said. A pause. There's a deputy director. Name is Carver. Margaret Carver. She's been outside Walsh's network the entire time. She runs a separate division. She doesn't owe him anything, and she has the authority to freeze an operation pending investigation. I know Carver, Elena said. I've met her twice. She's careful. She is careful, Callahan said, which is exactly what we need. We don't need someone who moves fast. We need someone who moves correctly. Does she know any of this? She knows nothing. She would need to be briefed from zero. Elena stopped moving. She stood still in the center of the room. If we go to Carver and Walsh finds out before Carver can act, he will characterize this as a rogue operator trying to cover an unauthorized kill with fabricated evidence. Yes, Callahan said, that is the risk. And Carver, if she hesitates, if she wants to verify, if she takes even 12 hours to sit on it, then Walsh has 12 hours, Callahan said. Yes, I know. I've run this scenario more times than I can count, Vasek. There is no clean version. Every path has a window of exposure. The question is which window is smallest. She looked at the tablet on the table. 41 names, 22 months. A man the world believed was dead, working alone in the dark because the proper channels had run straight back to the person he was trying to expose. She thought about what that was like, that specific kind of isolation, the knowledge that the system you had served your entire career had been quietly corrupted at a level high enough to reach you, and the only way through it was to disappear and work from outside. She had spent one day on a ridge, and she was already this tired. She could not begin to calculate what 22 months of it felt like. Carver, she said. I'll go to Carver directly, in person. Vasek. Not through a channel, she said. Not through a secure phone. In person, face to face, in a room where Walsh cannot intercept the conversation before it happens. I walk in, I put the tablet on her desk. I brief her myself. She looks me in the eye and she makes a decision. Silence on the line. That means you have to get to the city, Callahan said slowly. That means moving through territory where Walsh's people are already looking for you. How many people does Walsh have actively searching? At last count, 3 internal teams. 2 of them are operating under the cover of the debrief protocol. They're framed as escorts bringing you in for questioning. The third is less official. The third is the problem, she said. The third is the significant problem, yes. She looked at Reeves. How far are we from the city? 4 hours by this road, Reeves said. 3.5 if I push it. She made the calculation. Walsh's teams. Carver's office hours. The time Callahan's trace needed. The window of exposure on every possible path. She ran it all at once, the same way she ran ballistics. Not sequentially, but simultaneously, every variable in parallel, letting the picture resolve itself. Start the vehicle, she told Reeves. He was on his feet before she finished the sentence. Callahan, she said into the phone, I need you to do something for me while I move. I need you to reach out to Carver's office. Not to Carver directly, to someone in her office you trust, if such a person exists, and set up a condition for my arrival. I don't want to walk in cold. I want her primed to receive. There's one person in her office I have a limited contact with, Callahan said. Limited and old. I don't know if it still holds. Use it. Whatever you have, use it. Understood. A beat. Vasek. Be careful on that road. Walsh's less official team. I don't have a full picture of their composition, But what I do have suggests at least one of them has your physical description and your vehicle profile from the extraction point. She felt it land. The extraction point, which meant someone had surveillance on the extraction point, which meant the compromise was not just her positioning data on the ridge, it was the full extraction protocol. Walsh had burned the whole thing. "Reeves," she said, already moving toward the door, "we need a different vehicle." He was already thinking the same thing. She could see it on his face. "There's a farmhouse 3 kilometers north. The family there, I know them. Old contact. They have a truck. Go." They were out of the building and moving before she had finished putting the satellite phone in her jacket pocket. The cold air hit her and she registered it and moved through it. She heard Reeves start the engine. She got in. The vehicle moved. In the darkness of the back road, with nothing visible outside the windshield except the narrow cone of headlights on rough ground, she allowed herself 30 seconds of something that was not quite fear and not quite anger, but lived in the neighborhood of both. 30 seconds of acknowledging what was actually happening, that she was a credentialed intelligence operative being hunted by her own chain of command, carrying 22 months of evidence against a senior official, on a 4-hour drive toward a woman who might or might not choose to believe her, with a window that was measured in hours and a risk profile that kept expanding every time she got a new piece of information. 30 seconds. Then she put it away. "Tell me about Carver," she said to Reeves. He glanced in the mirror. "What do you want to know? What makes her move? What makes her hesitate? If I'm standing in front of her with this file, what's the thing that could stop her from acting?" Reeves thought about it. "Carver is political. Not in a corrupt way. She's not Walsh. But she spent 20 years getting to where she is inside an institution that rewards caution. She will want to be right before she moves. She will not want to be the person who accused a senior official and was wrong. So she needs the evidence to be overwhelming. She needs to feel like there is no version of events in which she ends up on the wrong side of history." Elena nodded. "Then I need to frame this not as an accusation of Walsh, but as a protection of Carver herself. She needs to understand that if she sits on this and Walsh's arrangement with Harkov becomes public through another channel, which it will, then her inaction becomes part of the story." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "That's a hard sell to someone you've met twice." "I know," she said, "but it's the true sell. And true sells work better than complicated ones." The farmhouse appeared in the headlights sooner than she expected. Reeves knew this road well, which she filed away. He stopped the vehicle and got out and spoke to someone at the door in low, quick tones. She stayed in the vehicle and watched the road behind them and thought about Walsh, about what he was doing right now in this same stretch of time. He was a man who had survived in intelligence for 19 years. He was not panicking. He was a man who had a protocol for every scenario, because that was what survival in that world required. A protocol for when your plans went wrong. A protocol for the protocol. Contingencies layered under contingencies. He would have a move prepared for exactly this situation. The question was whether she was in front of it or behind it. Reeves came back. "Truck is ours. They'll hold the vehicle here." She got out and moved to the truck without hurrying, which took effort, because every instinct she had was pushing her faster. She had learned over 11 years that hurrying was how you made mistakes. Speed was a tool. Hurrying was a panic response. She kept herself at the pace of purpose rather than the pace of fear. The truck was older and slower than the vehicle. Reeves noted this immediately. "We lose 30 minutes minimum," he said, pulling onto the road. "The 30 minutes is cheaper than being followed," she said. He nodded. She had already known he would agree. She pulled out the tablet and began going through the documentation again, not because she hadn't read it, but because she was looking for the piece that would hit Carver hardest. The piece that was so clean and clear that it couldn't be argued. She read for 40 minutes. Reeves drove. The road improved as they descended from the mountain terrain, and the truck found its rhythm. She found it on page 67. It was a communication log. A specific exchange, time-stamped 14 months ago, between a routing address that Callahan had traced back to Walsh's personal secure terminal and an encrypted drop used by Kharkov's intelligence network. The content of the exchange was brief, 7 lines, but the 7th line stopped her completely. She read it again, then a 3rd time. "Reeves," she said. "Yeah." In the file, page 67, the communication log from 14 months ago. "I know the one." The 7th line, Walsh gave Kharkov something beyond operational protection. She looked up from the tablet. He gave him a name, one specific name, an operative who was close to identifying Kharkov's arrangement with Walsh. Reeves kept his eyes on the road. "Yes. That operative," she looked back at the tablet. "The file doesn't say what happened to them. Callahan redacted it." A long pause. "Callahan redacted it," Reeves said carefully, "because the operative in question is someone you know." She went very still. "It's not in the file for your protection," Reeves said. "Callahan made that call a long time ago. He didn't know when or how he'd be able to reach you, but he knew that when he did, he wanted to be the one to tell you. Not a document." She set the tablet down on the seat between them. She looked straight ahead. "Tell me." Reeves exhaled slowly. "You remember a captain named Daniel Frey." She remembered Daniel Frey. She had served alongside Frey for 2 years. She remembered his voice and the way he argued, and the way he never let anything stay serious for more than 15 minutes, which was a survival mechanism she had always respected, even when it drove her insane. She remembered that 14 months ago, she had been told Frey died in a training accident. She remembered that she had not believed it, not entirely, but she had accepted it because the alternative, not accepting it, led somewhere she wasn't able to go. "Frey," she said. "Walsh gave his name to Kharkov's network," Reeves said. Frey had gotten close. He'd been running his own parallel track, separate from Callahan, not knowing Callahan existed. And Walsh found out. And Walsh— "Is Frey dead?" she said. The word in the truck after that was absolute. "Yes," Reeves said. "He is." She sat with it. She sat with it the way you sit with something that is too large to process immediately. You don't fight it. You don't run from it. You let it be present and you continue to function alongside it. She had done this before. She knew how. It did not make it easier. It made it possible, which was not the same thing. "Walsh killed Frey," she said, not as a question, as a sentence she was saying out loud, so it existed in the air between them and not just in her own skull. "Walsh gave his name," Reeves said quietly. "Kharkov's people did the rest. But yes, Walsh killed Frey." She picked up the satellite phone. Her hand was steady. She was watching her own hand, aware that she was watching it, aware of the particular effort behind that steadiness. And then she dialed. Callahan picked up. She said, "You should have told me about Frey before you sent me to read that file." A silence that had a texture to it, not empty, but full of something that sounded very much like guilt. "I know," Callahan said. "You should have told me before you sent Reeves to pick me up, before any of this." "I know," Callahan said again. "I'm sorry, Vasek. I needed you operational first. I needed you thinking about the mission and not about Frey," she said. "Yes." She breathed. In, out. "How long have you known?" 10 months, Callahan said. 10 months. She repeated it because it needed to be repeated. "You've known for 10 months that Walsh gave Frey's name to Kharkov's network, that Frey died because of it, and you stayed dark. I stayed dark because going loud with that information alone, without the full file, without the financial records, without the operational logs, would have given Walsh time to bury it, and Frey would have been the only casualty of an accusation that went nowhere." His voice was strained now. The control in it was visible as an effort. "I needed it to be enough to finish Walsh, not just enough to make noise." She understood the logic. She hated that she understood the logic. She sat with both things, the understanding and the hatred of it, and she let them coexist because that was what the situation required. Carver needs to know about Frey, she said. That goes in the brief. Walsh didn't just run a protection arrangement with an enemy actor. He ordered the death of a U.S. operative to protect that arrangement. That is not a bureaucratic violation. That is not a policy breach. That is murder. Yes, Callahan said. And when I sit down across from Carver, she said, that is the last thing I tell her. Not the first. The first is the file, the financial transfers, the documentation. I build it properly, and then I put Frey's name on the table at the end, and I watch what she does with it. Vasek, Callahan said, and there was something in his voice now she had not heard before in this conversation. Something that was not just urgency or guilt or strategy. Something that was close to fear. There's one more thing you need to know before you walk into Carver's office. She had known there was one more thing. There is always one more thing. Tell me, she said. Carver's office, Callahan said slowly. The contact I told you I'd reach out to. The limited, old contact in her staff. Yes. I reached out 40 minutes ago, he said. The contact responded. A pause that stretched 2 full seconds. The contact told me that Walsh has already been in contact with Carver. Tonight, within the last 3 hours. The truck hit a straight section of road, and Reeves accelerated, and the engine noise rose, and she pressed the phone closer to her ear. Walsh got to Carver first, she said. He got to Carver first, Callahan confirmed, and the contact doesn't know what was said, but they know Walsh came with a file of his own. And they know that after the meeting, Carver issued a standing hold on any incoming operational request connected to a Captain Elena Vasek. She looked at the road ahead of them. 4 hours had become 3. 3 hours had become 2.5. The window that had been measured in hours was now measured in something smaller. Walsh told her I went rogue, she said. Walsh told her something, Callahan said. Whatever it was enough to make Carver the wrong door. She thought about Carver being the wrong door. She thought about the 41 names in the file. She thought about Frey. She thought about Daniel Frey and the way he never let anything stay serious for more than 15 minutes. She thought about the fact that he had been running his own parallel track, separate from Callahan, finding the same truth from a different direction. She thought about what that said about the truth, that 2 people, working completely independently, had arrived at the same place. Then Carver is not the move, she said. We need another door. There is another door, Callahan said. There has always been another door. I was hoping we wouldn't need it. It's significantly more dangerous. She said, tell me. The other door had a name, and the name was Senator Richard Holt. Callahan said it the way you say something you have been avoiding saying, quickly, without preamble, as if speed could soften the weight of it. And Elena heard it and sat very still in the passenger seat of the old truck, while Reeves navigated a curve in the road. And she turned the name over in her mind the way you turn over a stone you are not sure you want to look under. Holt is on the Intelligence Oversight Committee, she said. Ranking member, Callahan said, which means he has the statutory authority to receive intelligence concerning potential misconduct by senior officials. It also means he has staff with security clearance, a direct line to the Inspector General, and enough political insulation that Walsh cannot simply make a phone call and neutralize him the way he neutralized Carver. Holt and Walsh have history, she said. They do. They despise each other. They do, Callahan said again, which some people would call a liability. I'm choosing to call it a structural advantage. She understood what he meant. A senator who despised Walsh would be motivated to act quickly. But a senator who despised Walsh could also be dismissed as acting from personal animus rather than genuine oversight concern. It was a double-edged thing. Everything about this night was a double-edged thing. Walsh will know the moment we approach Holt's office, she said. Walsh will know, Callahan agreed, which is why the approach cannot look like an approach. It cannot be a formal contact through channels. It has to be direct, personal, below the institutional radar. You want me to walk into a U.S. senator's private space and hand him classified documentation. I want you to do exactly that, yes. She looked out through the windshield at the dark road ahead. She thought about all the ways a thing like that could go wrong. She thought about Holt's security detail, his staff, the protocols around a sitting senator at this hour of the night. She thought about walking through all of that, carrying a tablet with 41 names and 22 months of evidence, and the weight of Daniel Fry's death in her chest like a stone. "Where is Holt right now?" she asked. "That's the part that may actually be working in our favor," Callahan said. And for the first time in this conversation, there was something in his voice that was close to controlled optimism. Holt is not in Washington. He's been at his private residence outside the city for the past 4 days. A congressional recess. His security detail is lighter. His staff is reduced to 2 aides. And the residence itself, a pause, is 40 minutes from your current position. She turned to Reeves. He was already nodding. He had known. Of course he had known. This had been the plan underneath the plan from the beginning. "You mapped this entire thing before you picked me up," she said to Reeves. "Callahan mapped it," Reeves said. "I just drove." "Pull up the route," she told him. He reached into the door pocket with one hand while keeping the other on the wheel and produced a folded paper map. Actual paper, she noted, which meant no digital signature, which meant Callahan had thought about every layer of this and set it on the seat between them. She opened it one-handed and found their position and found the residence and ran the road in her mind. 40 minutes, she confirmed. 35 if you skip the junction at the Valley Road, Reeves said. But the Valley Road has a checkpoint. Then 40 minutes, she said. She folded the map. She picked up the satellite phone again. "Callahan, Holt doesn't know we're coming." "Holt does not know you're coming," he confirmed. "Does his aide know? The contact you mentioned, is that in Holt's office or Carver's?" "Carver's," Callahan said. "I have nothing inside Holt's staff. This is a cold approach." She absorbed that. Cold approach to a sitting senator's private residence at, she checked, 11:47 at night, carrying classified materials. No introduction, no established trust, no institutional framing. She was an operator who had fired without authorization 12 hours ago and was currently the subject of an active debrief protocol. On paper, she was the worst possible source for anything Holt should be willing to touch. But the file was not on paper. The file was real. And she had learned, over 11 years, that real things had a quality to them that fabricated things did not. A kind of weight, a kind of texture. People who dealt in intelligence long enough developed a sense for it, the way a doctor develops a sense for symptoms that don't fit the expected pattern. Real things push back. They had corners. They caught light in uncomfortable ways. She was counting on Hope having that sense. "I need 20 minutes before we arrive," she told Callahan. "I need to think about how I open this." "You have it," Callahan said. "I'll stay on the line. Don't use it unless you need it. Keep the channel clear." She put the phone in her pocket. She looked at the road. She thought. The opening was everything. Holt would see her, hear her, and make a decision about her in the first 45 seconds. Not a conscious decision, an instinctive one. And that instinctive decision would color everything that came after. If he read her as desperate, as rogue, as politically motivated, she would spend the rest of the conversation pushing against that first impression, and she would lose time she didn't have. She needed him to read her as what she actually was, a person carrying a true thing who had run out of sanctioned options. The truck moved through the dark, and she sat with the silence and built it. Not a speech, not a presentation, a single, true sentence that opened into the rest. She had it by the time Reeves made the turn onto the private road that led to Holt's residence. He slowed the truck as the residence came into view. There were lights on in 2 rooms on the ground floor. A single security vehicle was parked near the front entrance. One guard, visible through the windshield, standing under the overhang near the front door. Reeves stopped the truck 30 meters back. "How do you want to do this?" "Straight in," she said. "No concealment. Direct approach. Hands visible. Slow movement. I identify myself immediately." She paused. "If the guard calls it in before I get to the door, we have approximately 90 seconds before Holt's staff makes a decision about whether to engage or dismiss. I need to be through the door before that decision is made." "And if they don't let you through?" She looked at him. "They'll let me through." She got out of the truck. The guard saw her immediately, and his posture changed. Not alarm exactly, but a sharpening of attention. She walked toward him at an even pace, hands at her sides, open. She spoke before he could. "My name is Captain Elena Vasek," she said clearly. "I'm a credentialed intelligence operative, and I have materials that Senator Holt needs to see tonight. I am not a threat. I am asking for 3 minutes of his time. 3 minutes. After that, if he wants me removed, I will go without resistance." The guard stared at her. He was young, mid-20s, probably former military, the kind of careful that has been trained rather than born. He reached for his radio. "Before you call that in," she said, "understand that what I'm carrying involves a senior intelligence official. If that call goes through the standard channel, there is a possibility, I'm not saying certainty, I'm saying possibility, that it reaches the wrong person before it reaches the right one. I am asking you, personally, to walk inside and tell the senator that Captain Elena Vasek is at the door with materials relevant to active intelligence misconduct. That's all. Let him make the decision." The guard looked at her for a long moment. His hand stayed on the radio, but did not activate it. "Wait here," he said. He went inside. She stood in the cold with her hands at her sides, and she did not move, and she did not look back at the truck, and she breathed slowly and counted. She reached 43 before the door opened again. The man who opened it was not the guard. He was in his mid-60s, with gray hair and the kind of face that had been lived in hard, not unkind, but undeceived. He was wearing a sweater and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, which told her he had been working when the guard came to him, which told her he was the kind of man who worked late even on recess, which told her something useful about how he operated. Senator Richard Holt looked at her for 3 full seconds without speaking. Then he said, "You're Vasek." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Come inside." The room he took her to was a study, books on 3 walls, a desk with a lamp and papers spread across it. He did not sit behind the desk. He sat in a chair to the side of it and gestured to the chair across from him. And she sat, and he looked at her with the full attention of a man who has learned that the most important thing you can do in any conversation is listen first. She placed the tablet on the small table between them. She said, 6 years ago, a senior intelligence official entered into an arrangement with a foreign military commander named Dmitry Kharkov. Under that arrangement, Kharkov provided intelligence on compromised assets across 7 allied networks. In exchange, the official provided Kharkov with operational protection, blocking sanctioned targeting operations, providing advance warning of surveillance, and actively managing Kharkov's continued survival. That arrangement resulted in the deaths of 43 civilians in the past 6 weeks alone. It also resulted in the death of a U.S. intelligence operative 14 months ago when the official provided Kharkov's network with that operative's identity. She paused. Today I shot Kharkov at a range of 5,368 meters. I fired without formal authorization because my authorization was pulled by the same official who has been protecting Kharkov for 6 years. The documentation of everything I have just told you is on that tablet. 22 months of evidence compiled by an operative who was declared KIA by the same official 18 months ago, specifically to prevent this evidence from surfacing. Holt had not moved. He had not changed expression. He was watching her with those steady, undeceived eyes, and she could feel him processing it. Not the emotional weight of it, not yet, but the structural shape of it, the way a lawyer processes a case. The official's name, he said, Deputy Director Alan Walsh. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, not satisfaction, something more complicated than either. You said the operative who compiled this evidence was declared KIA. Yes, sir. And this operative is alive? Yes, sir. And the documentation on this tablet, how was it compiled and through what channels was it verified? The financial transfer records were pulled from routing systems with timestamps that can be independently verified by any forensic accountant with appropriate clearance. The operational logs are authenticated with authorization codes that exist in Command's own system and can be cross-referenced. The intercepts carry metadata that establishes origin and chain of custody. She leaned forward slightly. Senator, this file has one gap, a direct communication link between Walsh's terminal and Harkov's network from today's operation. That gap is being closed within the next 6 hours by active trace work. But the 80% that exists right now is sufficient to establish the shape and duration and scope of the arrangement. Holt picked up the tablet. He looked at it. He did not open it yet. He looked at the device itself for a moment, in the way a person looks at a thing they are deciding to hold. Walsh contacted me 3 months ago, Holt said. She had not known that. She kept her expression neutral. He came to my office in Washington, Holt continued. He told me he had received intelligence suggesting that my office had a staff member who had been compromised by a foreign intelligence service. He offered to share the details in a private briefing. He set the tablet down. I declined. I told him to go through the formal Inspector General process. He told me that the IG process would expose the staff member before the investigation was complete and would burn the intelligence. Holt looked at her. I declined again. He left. He was establishing leverage, she said. The same staff member he described to you is almost certainly in that file. He wanted you to accept a private briefing so that you would be in possession of intelligence delivered outside formal channels by Walsh himself, which would give him the ability to characterize any subsequent action on your part as contaminated by an unauthorized intelligence relationship with a deputy director, Holt said. He said it calmly, the way a person says something they have already figured out but needed to hear confirmed. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment. The operative who died 14 months ago, the one whose name Walsh gave to Harkov's network. Captain Daniel Frey, she said. Did you know him? Yes, she said. And she said nothing more than that, because there was nothing more that needed to be said in this room, to this man, in this moment. Holt looked at her. Something in his expression changed. Not softened exactly. This was not a soft man, but it opened, as if the single word yes had confirmed something for him about who she was and why she was here, and what kind of weight she had been carrying to get to this chair. He opened the tablet. He read for 14 minutes. She did not speak. The aide who had appeared in the doorway at some point, young woman, sharp-eyed, a legal pad in her hand, also did not speak. The guard had returned to his post outside. Reeves was still in the truck 30 meters away. The world outside this room continued its business, and inside it, there was only the sound of a senator reading and the occasional turn of a digital page. When he put the tablet down, he looked at the aide. Get me Morrison, he said. The aide left immediately. Morrison is my general counsel, Holt told Elena. He'll be on the phone in 3 minutes. He's going to have questions about chain of custody and classification levels, and he is going to have a significant number of concerns about my receiving this material in this setting. He looked at her steadily. I want you to understand that I am choosing to do this anyway. I want you to understand why. She waited. Walsh came to my office 3 months ago, Holt said, And he tried to do to me what it appears he has done to every other person who got close to this. He tried to contaminate the channel before I could use it. The fact that he tried, the fact that he felt it was necessary to come to me personally 3 months ago and attempt that, told me that he was afraid of exactly this situation, a direct approach. Someone coming to me directly, outside the institutional channel he controls. Holt's jaw was set. He was afraid of you, Captain. He just didn't know it was you yet. She heard something in her chest that was not quite relief. It was larger than relief and more complicated. It was the specific feeling of having been right about a person you needed to be right about. The aide came back to the doorway. Morrison is on. Holt stood. He picked up the tablet. He paused. Captain Vasek, Walsh will know about this approach within a few hours regardless of what we do. When he knows his options, he still has the operational teams looking for you, and he still has whatever the third team, the unofficial one, is prepared to do. I know, she said. You need to be somewhere that is not this residence and not in a vehicle on a public road for the next 12 hours, while my office processes this material and constructs the formal mechanism for moving it forward. He looked at her with that undeceived gaze. Do you have somewhere? She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. I'll find somewhere. My aide will give you a number before you leave, he said. It is a direct line to Morrison. If anything changes, if Walsh moves before we can get the formal mechanism in place, you call that number. Immediately. Do not wait to be sure. Call immediately. She stood. She looked at him. She said, There's one more thing, Senator. He waited. Callahan, the operative Walsh declared KIA. He has been working this for 22 months. He needs to come in from the cold. She held his gaze. Not quietly, not through a process that Walsh can touch. He needs to come in through your office with full documentation of how his death was fabricated and why. Holt said, Is Callahan on a line right now? She pulled the satellite phone from her jacket and set it on the table between them. Holt looked at the phone. He looked at her. He picked it up. Callahan, he said into it. He paused, listening. Then, I'm going to need you to stay exactly where you are for the next few hours. Can you do that? A pause. Good. Another pause, longer. I know it's been a long time. You did the right thing. He lowered the phone and set it back on the table and looked at Elena. He sounds tired. He's been doing this alone for 22 months, she said. Holt nodded. Go, he said. Stay off the main road. Call Morrison if anything moves. She went. Outside, the cold hit her again, and she walked to the truck and got in. And Reeves looked at her and she said, Drive. He drove. For the first 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Reeves said, How did it go? He read the file, she said. And Walsh tried to contaminate him 3 months ago and failed, which means Walsh knew Holt was a potential threat for at least 3 months, which means Walsh has had 3 months to prepare a countermove for exactly this scenario. Reeves processed that, meaning Walsh has something ready for when Holt moves. Walsh always has something ready, she said. 19 years. That's what 19 years in that world produces. A person who has a protocol for every eventuality. She looked at the road. The question is whether the protocol he prepared for Holt is operational yet, whether it's live right now or whether it needs time to activate. Her phone buzzed, not the satellite phone. The secondary phone Reeves had given her when they transferred vehicles. A clean number, unknown to any channel Walsh had access to. She looked at it. A text message. No sender identification. 4 words. She stared at those 4 words for a moment that stretched. She showed the screen to Reeves. He read it. His hands tightened on the wheel. The 4 words said, Walsh is already here. She looked up from the screen. Here meaning another buzz. A location pin. She opened it. The pin was placed 40 meters from Senator Holt's residence. She was already reaching for the satellite phone when it buzzed first. Callahan's line. She answered before the first ring completed. "I see it," Callahan said, and his voice was stripped down to its hardest layer. No texture, no inflection, just information delivered at the speed of emergency. "Walsh's third team. They followed you from the extraction point. I don't know how they made the vehicle switch, but they did. They have been sitting on Holt's residence since approximately 20 minutes before you arrived." "They let me walk in," she said. "They let you walk in," Callahan confirmed. "Because if they took you before you went in, the material was still at risk of reaching Holt. But if they let you go in, and then they take Holt's copy of the material, and they take you simultaneously, then there is no file, and there is no operative," she said. "There is only Walsh's version of events." "Yes, Holt," she said. "Is Holt?" "Holt is still in the residence. I don't know his status. I don't know if the team has moved yet." She said to Reeves, "Turn around." He was already turning. "Callahan," she said. "Morrison, Holt's general counsel. Is he on a secure line right now?" "He should be, yes." "The file needs to leave Morrison's hands in the next 4 minutes and go somewhere Walsh cannot reach. Not a channel, not a system, a person. One specific person outside Walsh's entire network who can hold it and attest to its receipt. Does Morrison have that person?" "I don't know what Morrison has." "Then get on a line to Morrison right now," she said, "and find out. Because if Walsh's team pulls that tablet from Holt's residence in the next 10 minutes, everything we have built tonight is gone." She lowered the phone. The truck was accelerating back toward Holt's residence. She thought about Walsh sitting 40 meters away while she had been in that room. She thought about the patience of it, the cold calculation of it, letting her walk in, letting her lay out the entire case to Holt, letting her feel like the door had opened, and then closing it. She had called it correctly earlier. Walsh always had a protocol. She had just underestimated how far ahead of her it was. But there was one thing Walsh could not have calculated, one variable he could not have controlled. Because Walsh did not know that 22 months ago, before Callahan disappeared into the dark, before Walsh fabricated the KIA report and sealed the file and told Elena Vasek that the person was dead, Callahan had done one more thing. One thing that was not in any document, not in the file on the tablet, not in any communication Callahan and Elena had exchanged tonight. Callahan had done one more thing, and he had told exactly one person. And that person was not Elena. That person was Daniel Fry. She had not known that yet. She was about to find out. The truck stopped 60 meters from Holt's residence, and Reeves cut the headlights before Elena had finished speaking. She was already out of the vehicle, moving low, moving fast, using the dark the way she had used 1,000 darks before this one, not fighting it, reading it, letting it work for her instead of against her. She could see the security vehicle that belonged to Holt's detail. She could see a second vehicle she had not noticed on the way out, parked at an angle that looked casual and was not casual at all. That was Walsh's team. She counted 2 visible figures. Standard protocol for a team like this would be 4, 2 visible, 2 positioned. She didn't know where the other 2 were, and that was the problem that pressed hardest right now. She got back in the truck. 2 visible, 2 unaccounted, she told Reeves. They're waiting on a signal. They haven't moved yet, which means they're still on a hold order. Walsh is managing the timing himself. Reeves looked at the residents. What's the hold for? He wants the tablet confirmed in hand before he takes Holt, she said. He needs to know the file transferred to Morrison's channel, and he needs to intercept it at the transfer point. Taking Holt without the file is just an abduction. Taking Holt with the file is a controlled narrative. She pulled out the satellite phone. Callahan, Morrison, where are we? Morrison is on a secure line. Callahan's voice was tighter than she had ever heard it. He received the file. He's been transmitting a copy to his own secure server for the past 6 minutes. Walsh will intercept that server. Morrison knows he's not transmitting to his server. A pause. He's transmitting somewhere else, somewhere I suggested. Where? 3 journalists, Callahan said. 3 separate journalists at 3 separate outlets. Each one receives 1/3 of the file. No single journalist has the complete picture, but all 3 together, and they only need to compare notes to assemble it, have everything. She sat with that for exactly 1 second. That's not a legal mechanism. That's a press release. That's a guarantee, Callahan said. Walsh can pressure a senator. He can pressure a deputy director. He cannot pressure 3 journalists at 3 separate organizations simultaneously without creating exactly the kind of noise that destroys him. The moment those files land in those inboxes, Walsh loses the ability to move quietly. He loses the third team's operational utility, because anything that happens to you or to Holt or to me in the next 24 hours becomes part of a story that is already in motion. She looked at Reeves. He was watching her with steady eyes. When does the transmission complete? She asked. 4 minutes, Callahan said. Maybe 5. Walsh's hold order breaks before that, she said. He's going to move in the next 2 minutes. He cannot afford to wait for Morrison to finish. I know. So we need to hold Walsh's team for 4 minutes without a confrontation that turns this into something that looks like what Walsh will say it looks like. A silence. How? Callahan said. She thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds was what she had. She thought about Walsh's team outside, 4 trained operatives on a hold order, waiting for a signal from a man who was not physically present, but who was monitoring every element of this situation from somewhere with a secure line and enough institutional authority to make the next 4 minutes very dangerous for everyone inside that residence. She thought about what Walsh needed right now, what he could not proceed without. He needs me, she said out loud. Reeves looked at her. Walsh's entire structure tonight depends on controlling the narrative about the unauthorized shot. Everything else, the file, Holt, Callahan, everything is secondary, because without the unauthorized shot as the lead, Walsh doesn't have a villain. He doesn't have a rogue operative. He has a complicated intelligence misconduct case that points back at him. She was thinking as she spoke, building it in real time. If I give him me, voluntarily, visibly, in a way that looks like surrender, he has to redirect. He has to pull his team's attention. He cannot move on hope while he's managing my surrender. That's too many moving pieces. Vasek, Reeves said carefully, if you walk toward that team, they will take you. Yes, she said. And Walsh takes you, the file doesn't matter. The file will be transmitted in 4 minutes, she said. If Walsh's team is dealing with me for 4 minutes, they are not moving on hope. Reeves stared at her. That's a significant gamble with your own body. I've been making those for 11 years, she said. She picked up the satellite phone. Callahan, do you have a direct line to Walsh? A channel he would pick up from you? A pause. I have the line he used to reach me before he burned my file. I don't know if it's still live. Try it, she said. Don't speak to him. Just open the line and let him hear it's you. That's all. Why? Because Walsh believes you're a ghost, she said. The moment he hears your voice on a live line, he stops everything else for 30 seconds while he recalibrates. 30 seconds is what I need to get positioned. Positioned for what? Callahan said. She was already opening the door. Trust me. She stepped out of the truck. She did not move toward Walsh's team immediately. She moved along the edge of the road, staying in the darkness just beyond the reach of the residence lights, working her way to an angle where she could be seen from the vehicle clearly, where her face would be visible, her posture readable, her intent unmistakable. Her phone buzzed once. Callahan. The line to Walsh was open. She stepped into the light. She put both hands up, shoulder height, open palms forward, and she walked directly toward Walsh's vehicle at a measured pace. She counted her steps. She watched the 2 visible figures react, the sharp, sudden movement of people who have been on a hold order and have just seen their primary target walk voluntarily into their sightline. She watched them communicate with each other without speaking, the way trained people communicate, small gestures and weight shifts that mean things to people who know the language. One of them raised a radio. She kept walking. 10 meters. 8. She was counting on Walsh being on that radio channel. She was counting on him receiving the report. Primary subject approaching voluntarily, hands up, no apparent threat, and taking exactly the 3 seconds required to recalibrate, because Walsh was a meticulous man, and meticulous men do not act on unexpected information without 3 seconds of processing. She was at 6 meters when the figure with the radio lowered it and spoke directly to her. "Stop right there." She stopped. "Keep your hands where they are." She kept her hands exactly where they were. "Turn around slowly." "I'm not going to turn around," she said. Her voice was level and clear and carried exactly the weight she intended. "I am going to stand here and I am going to tell you that I want to speak to Walsh directly. Not through a radio, not through a channel. I want a direct phone line to Walsh in the next 60 seconds. Or I am going to walk back the way I came, and the next time your team sees me will be in front of a Senate Oversight Committee." Silence from both figures. She kept her hands up. She looked straight at the one with the radio. She counted silently. 1, 2, 3, 4. The radio crackled. A voice came through it that she recognized immediately. Walsh. Live. Which meant Walsh had been monitoring the channel. Which meant Callahan's open line had done exactly what she needed. It had spiked Walsh's attention and brought him to the radio himself. "Vasek," Walsh said through the radio. His voice was controlled. Almost perfectly controlled. The almost was everything. "Walsh," she said, a pause. "You walked into my team's sightline voluntarily." "I did." "Why?" "Because the alternative was watching your team move on a sitting senator," she said. "And because I want to talk to you directly, not through your lawyers, and not through a debrief protocol, and not through the institutional mechanism you've built to manage this." She paused. "I want to talk to you the way two people talk when they are done pretending." A longer pause. "You think talking to me changes anything?" "I think in the next 3 minutes," she said, "something is going to change that changes everything. And I want you to hear it from me and not from a news alert on your phone." Silence on the radio. She counted. 2 minutes and 11 seconds since she had stepped into the light. Morrison needed 4 minutes. She had bought 2. She needed 90 more seconds. "You killed Daniel Frey," she said. The radio was silent. "You gave his name to Harkov's network," she said. "You gave the name of a U.S. intelligence operative to a foreign military commander because Frey was getting close to what you and Harkov had built together. And Harkov's people did the rest." She kept her voice flat and factual and carried it at Walsh's team so the 2 figures in front of her could hear every word. "I want you to know that I know that. I want you to know that I have known it for approximately 4 hours. And I want you to know that the reason I fired that shot today, the reason I put a round through 5,368 meters of air and ended Harkov's life, was not because of any order or any mission protocol. It was because of 43 civilians in 6 weeks, and because of Frey, and because 19 years of watching people like you operate has brought me to a place where I am no longer willing to pretend that the rules you use to protect yourself are the same rules the rest of us are supposed to follow." She heard something through the radio. Not a voice, a sound. The sound of a man who has spent 19 years maintaining a perfect surface, making a very small crack in it. "You have nothing that proves any of that," Walsh said. But the control in his voice had shifted. By a fraction. By enough. "Morrison transmitted the file 4 minutes ago," she said. Silence. She waited. "The file went to 3 journalists," she said. "Not to a single outlet. Not to a channel you can pressure. 3 separate journalists at 3 separate organizations. Each one has 1/3 of 22 months of evidence. It took me 30 seconds to do the math on how long it will take them to compare notes. She lowered her hands to her sides. Walsh, it's over. The radio was quiet for 8 full seconds. Then Walsh's voice came back, and something in it had changed so fundamentally that she almost didn't recognize it. Not the tone, but the quality beneath the tone. The thing that had always been underneath Walsh's voice, that engine of calculation and control and forward planning, had gone quiet. For the first time in 19 years, Walsh had run out of protocol. "Who compiled the file?" he said. She considered not answering. Then she decided that the truth, at this point, was the only currency left worth spending. "Callahan," she said. The radio went silent. And then she heard Walsh do something she had never heard from him in any briefing or any debrief or any operational communication. She heard him exhale. A long, slow exhale. The sound of a man setting down something he has been carrying too long. "Callahan is alive," Walsh said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes." Another silence. Then one of the figures in front of her, the one without the radio, who had been standing with his hand near his sidearm for the past 3 minutes, slowly, deliberately moved that hand away. She watched him do it. She watched the decision move through his body before it moved through his actions. He was making the calculation independently. He was a trained operative, and he was looking at the shape of this situation, and he was making the call his own way. The second figure looked at the first, a long look. Then he also moved. He reached for his radio, not Walsh's channel, a different channel, and he spoke 3 words into it that she couldn't hear clearly but understood from the body language. "Stand down." Walsh's voice came through once more. "You understand what happens now," he said. "Yes," she said. "You understand that I will face a process, institutional, legal, prolonged." "Yes." "And you are prepared to be part of that process, as a witness, as the person who fired the shot." "I fired the shot," she said. "I will stand in front of anyone who wants to ask me why. I have never been afraid of that question. I have been afraid of what happens when nobody asks it." Walsh said nothing for a moment. Then, "You're a better operator than I gave you credit for, Vasek." She said, "You gave Frey's name to Harkov's network. Don't compliment me right now." The radio went dead. She stood in the cold for a moment with her hands at her sides, and the 2 operatives in front of her not moving, and the residence behind them with its lights on in 2 rooms, and somewhere inside it, a senator who had just received 22 months of evidence, and a general counsel who had just transmitted it to 3 journalists, and a file that was already in motion in a way that nothing Walsh could do in the next 12 hours could stop. She turned and walked back to the truck. Reeves was standing outside it. He had watched the whole thing without moving. When she reached him, he looked at her the way a person looks at someone they have been genuinely worried about and are now genuinely relieved to see whole. "Walsh," he said. "Done," she said. He absorbed that. Done meaning his team is standing down, meaning the file is transmitted, meaning in approximately 2 hours, the first journalist is going to start making calls. And by morning, this is going to be a different kind of problem for Walsh than the kind he is used to having. She got in the truck. "Get in." He got in. He started the engine. He didn't drive yet. He sat for a moment and looked at the steering wheel. "When did you know it would work? Walking into their sight line like that?" "I didn't know it would work," she said. He looked at her. "I knew it was the right move," she said. "Those are different things." He nodded slowly. Then he pulled onto the road. She picked up the satellite phone. Callahan answered before the first ring completed, the way he had been answering all night, immediately, as if the phone had been in his hand the whole time, as if he had been waiting across the entire 22 months for a moment exactly like this one. "Walsh's team stood down," she said. A silence that was not empty, a silence that had weight and texture, and something that sounded very much like a man allowing himself, for the first time in almost 2 years, to believe that it was actually over. "The journalists," he said, "received Another silence. How long before the first story breaks? Morning, she said, maybe earlier. She heard him breathe. Just breathe. It was the simplest sound she had heard all night, and it hit her harder than anything else because she understood what it meant. It meant a man who had been in the dark for 22 months, alone, working from nothing towards something that must have felt impossible most of those days, allowing himself to come back into the light. It was the sound of someone who had kept going through every reason to stop and had arrived, at last, at the other side of it. Callahan, she said. Yeah. Holt is going to bring you in formally, through his office. The fabricated KIA report, the full record. It gets corrected through official channels with Holt's office as the institutional guarantor. You will not come back quietly. You will come back in the light. He was quiet for a long moment. I didn't do this to come back, he said. I know, she said, but you're going to come back anyway. A beat, then something that was very nearly a laugh, not quite, but close enough. Frey would have found a way to make a joke about this, Callahan said. He always did that. Right when everything was at its worst, he'd find the one thing that was absurd about it, and he'd say it out loud, and it would be completely wrong for the moment, and somehow exactly right at the same time. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Yes, she said, he would have. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Frey sooner, Callahan said. I know. I needed you operational. I know, she said again. It's done. She meant more than the conversation. He understood that. He was quiet for a moment in the way of a person who understands what has just been said and is choosing to let it land fully before responding. Get somewhere safe, he said. Holt's aide will have a location for you by the time you reach the city. Morrison arranged it. All right. Vasek. His voice was different now, not operational, not strategic, just a voice. Thank you. She held the phone for a moment without speaking. There were things she could have said. She could have talked about Frey. She could have talked about the 43 people in 6 villages whose names she did not know, but whose weight she had been carrying since she first reviewed the operational file 3 weeks ago. She could have talked about the ridge and the shot and the 6 seconds between the trigger and the impact and what happens inside a person during 6 seconds like that. She could have said any of those things. She said, "Get some sleep, Callahan." She lowered the phone. The truck moved through the dark. Reeves drove and didn't speak, and she appreciated that. She sat with the quiet and let herself feel the edges of the night. All of it. The ridge at dawn, the shot, Walsh's voice on the radio telling her to stand down, the extraction point with 11 extra minutes in trembling hands, Reeves appearing instead of Dolan, Callahan's voice coming back from the dead, Holt's steady, undeceived eyes reading the file under the lamplight, the 4 words on the text message, standing in Walsh's sightline with her hands up in the cold. She thought about Frey. She had not let herself think about Frey completely. She had held the fact of it at a careful distance all night, close enough to use as fuel, far enough not to let it dismantle her while she still needed to function. Now in the truck, with the worst of it behind her, she let it come. Daniel Frey had been running his own parallel track. That was the thing that kept returning to her. Separate from Callahan, not knowing Callahan existed, finding the same truth from a different direction. Which meant the truth was not just the truth Callahan had found, or the truth she had fired a bullet toward. It was a truth that multiple people, working independently, kept arriving at. It had a gravity to it. It pulled you in if you got close enough. Frey had gotten close enough, and Walsh had known, and Walsh had made a phone call, and Frey was dead. She thought about the last conversation she and Frey had had, 2 weeks before she received the notification of his death. It had been a short call, nothing significant on the surface. She had been between assignments. He had been somewhere she wasn't supposed to know about, and they had talked for 11 minutes about something she could no longer remember because at the time she had believed there would be more conversations. And you never remember the last ordinary thing as well as you remember the last extraordinary one. She wished she remembered it. She was going to carry the not remembering for a long time. But here was the thing she had not known until tonight. The thing Callahan had told Reeves, and Reeves had not yet fully explained. The thing that had been building at the edge of this story since Callahan said he had done one more thing and told exactly one person. She picked up the phone one more time. Not Callahan's line. She called Reeves's secondary number, the clean one, from the satellite phone, and she watched Reeves reach for his own phone with one hand. The thing Callahan told Frey, she said, before he disappeared, before Walsh fabricated the KIA report, Callahan did one more thing and he told Frey, "Tell me what it was." Reeves set his phone down. He was quiet for almost 30 seconds, which was the longest she had seen him be quiet about anything. Callahan had a failsafe, Reeves said. The documentation he had built, not the full 22 months that came later, but the first version, the initial evidence package. He built a failsafe into it, a dead man's switch. She went very still. He encrypted the initial package, and he split the decryption key into two parts, Reeves said. He kept one part. He gave the other part to Frey. The logic was simple. If Walsh moved on Callahan, if Callahan disappeared or died or was otherwise silenced, the package could not be opened with only one half of the key. Both people had to be alive, and both people had to choose to open it. She understood immediately, which is why Walsh moved on Frey instead of on Callahan. Callahan figures that's exactly it, Reeves said. Walsh couldn't move on both simultaneously, so he had to choose. And he chose Frey because Frey was the one who had gotten operationally close. Frey was the one whose access to active systems represented the more immediate risk. He paused. Walsh took Frey and he bought himself time. But he couldn't open the package because he only had one half of the key, and Callahan had the other half, she said. Callahan had the other half. And Callahan disappeared before Walsh could move on him too. And Walsh spent 14 months sitting on a locked package that he knew existed, that he couldn't open and couldn't be certain what it contained or how complete it was. She thought about that. Walsh, for 14 months, operating under the shadow of an encrypted package he could not open, knowing it was out there, knowing that Callahan was out there somewhere with the key. That was a particular kind of pressure, the kind that would explain why Walsh had become more aggressive, more controlling, more desperate in his operational decisions. He was a man trying to hold a structure together while knowing there was a bomb inside it he couldn't locate. The package, she said, is that what's in the file Callahan sent to the journalists? Part of it, Reeves said. The fail-safe documents are the foundation, the 22 months of additional evidence built on top of them. Together, they're not just a story about Walsh and Kharkov. They're a complete structural account of how a senior intelligence official maintained a 6-year corrupt arrangement, protected it through fabricated deaths and institutional manipulation, and was ultimately exposed by the people he tried to eliminate. She sat back. She looked at the dark outside the windshield. Frey gave Callahan the key, she said, before he died. He knew Walsh was coming, and he got the key to Callahan somehow. Callahan received it 48 hours before Frey's death, Reeves said quietly. He doesn't know how Frey knew Walsh was moving on him. He thinks Frey must have seen something. Access logs, surveillance anomalies, something that told him the clock had started. And instead of running, Frey got the key out first. She closed her eyes. There it was. There was the whole of Daniel Fry in one action. The man who never let anything stay serious for more than 15 minutes, and who, when the clock started and the choice was between running and finishing the thing that mattered, didn't run. He got the key out first, and then he was gone. She did not say anything for a while. She let the quiet in the truck hold it. Reeves drove and didn't speak, and the dark moved past the windows, and she sat with Frey's last act, the way you sit with something that is both devastating and deeply specifically right, the way someone's truest self shows up in their last moment, undeniable, complete. He knew it would get out eventually, she said finally. Frey. He knew that as long as the key reached Callahan, the rest of it would surface. He just didn't know when or how. He knew you'd be part of it, Reeves said. She looked at him. The message he sent with the key, Reeves said. Callahan showed it to me. 3 sentences. The third one said, he said your name. He said when this surfaces, Vasek will be part of how it ends. He didn't know how. He just knew. She looked at the road ahead. She felt the weight of that settle into her, not as burden, but as something else. As the specific weight of being known, of having a person understand you well enough, from enough shared years and enough shared silence, and enough of the specific texture of who you both were, to know what you would do before you did it. She had not let herself cry in 11 years. She was not going to cry now. But she sat with her hands flat on her knees in the dark truck, and she pressed them down, and she breathed the way she breathed on the ridge, slow, deliberate, present, and she allowed herself to acknowledge, without drama and without denial, that Daniel Frey had believed in her when she had not yet had the opportunity to believe in herself, and that she had made the shot, and that the shot had held, and that the thing he had started, and that Callahan had carried in the dark for 22 months, and that she had driven through the night to deliver to a man in reading glasses in a study full of books, was now in the world in a way that could not be recalled. It was done. By 7:43 in the morning, the first story broke. It ran with a headline that was careful and precise in the way that serious journalism is careful and precise. Not inflammatory, not hedging, just the shape of the truth, laid out clean and complete in a sequence that any reader could follow. By 9:15, 2 more stories broke from the other outlets. The 3 pieces taken together assembled the full picture. The financial transfers, the operational logs, the 41 names, the 6-year arrangement, Walsh's protection of Kharkov through 3 separate sanctioned targeting operations, the fabricated KIA report. Fry. By 11 o'clock, Walsh had retained legal counsel and declined to make a statement. By noon, Senator Holt had formally requested an emergency session of the Intelligence Oversight Committee and submitted the documentation from his office as an official exhibit. By 2 in the afternoon, 3 of the 41 names in the file had voluntarily come forward to Holt's office to provide corroborating testimony. By the time the sun went down on that second day, Alan Walsh had resigned his position, effective immediately, and the formal investigation had been opened by the Inspector General's office, with a scope that the official language described as broad and without limitation. Elena heard all of it through Callahan's voice on the satellite phone. Updates delivered at intervals, factual, without ceremony, the way intelligence is supposed to be delivered. She was in a safe location that Morrison had arranged, which was a room above a restaurant that served no purpose she was clear on, with a cot and a window and a phone charger. She had slept for 4 hours. She had eaten something. She had looked at her hands and found them still. She had thought about the ridge, about the 6 seconds, about the way the valley had held the echo and then let it go. Callahan called at 9 in the evening. She picked up. Holt's office just confirmed my reinstatement, he said. Full reinstatement. The fabricated KIA report is being formally corrected in the record. Good, she said. The unauthorized shot, Callahan said carefully. Holt's team has framed it in the oversight request as a necessary action taken under conditions of compromised authorization, meaning the authorization was being withheld corruptly, which removes the standard accountability framework that Walsh was going to use against you. She absorbed that. Meaning I am not going to a tribunal? Meaning you are going to a very long debrief with people who are not Walsh, Callahan said. But no tribunal, no prosecution. She was quiet for a moment. Vasek, Callahan said, you did it. Frey did it, she said. 14 months ago, in the 48 hours before he died, when he got you the key and he chose to finish the thing instead of running, that is when this was won. Everything tonight was just the delivery. Callahan was quiet for a long time after that. Not the quiet of a man who has nothing to say, the quiet of a man who has everything to say and understands that none of it is adequate and chooses the silence as the most honest response. She understood. She felt the same. "Get some rest," she told him. She set the phone down. She looked at the window. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way. Lights and sounds in the particular anonymous density of a place where most people have no idea what has happened in the hours just behind them. That was fine. That was how it was supposed to work. The people in that city going about their evening had been protected for 6 years by operatives whose names they would never know, and compromised for 6 years by a man who had turned protection into commerce. And now one part of that arrangement had ended, and the other part would continue, because that was what it meant to believe in something larger than any single person's survival. She thought about Peter, the school teacher in the village square. She did not know what had happened to him after the shot. She did not know if he had gone home that night, or if his family had found him, or if the swelling in his eye had gone down. She had no way to know. She would probably never know. She held that uncertainty the way she held all the uncertainties she had accumulated over 11 years. Not comfortably, not at peace with it exactly, but without pretending it was otherwise. She had made the shot. The valley had held the echo, and the echo had not stopped at the valley walls. It had moved outward through channels and documents in the hands of people who chose to carry it, through 22 months of dark work and one night of barely controlled chaos, until it arrived, intact and sufficient, in a place where it could do what it had always needed to do. Some things, once set in motion by the right hands at the right moment, do not stop until they have finished what they started. Elena Vasek had known, on that ridge, exactly what she was starting. She had made sure it finished.